Hello and welcome to the Reach Out for Mental Health podcast. I'm Stu Whiffin. Beside me always, Kirsty Eaton. How are you?
I'm beside myself excited.
Well, I can tell why you're excited. It's because we've got a guest today, and it's Billy Lunn from the Subways. Hello, Billy.
Hello. It's so good to see you both.
Oh, I can't think when I last spoke to you. I think it would have been. Oh, do you know what? I did speak to you. You done me a lovely little message when I've done the Ukraine trip.
That's right.
That was the last time.
Yeah. What a gesture that was by you. How did it go? It looked incredible.
It was. Yeah. Do you know what? It's weird to say that it was good, but it was good. It was like just seeing the sort of levels of kindness from people all over the world that were just sort of descending upon the border. It was quite something to see. And you know, obviously that's tagged with a lot of horror that was going on the other side of the border. But yeah, it was, and it was sort of getting sort of messages from familiar faces like yourself that would sort of stop people as they're scrolling through their social media feeds. Like, it's Billy from the Subways. What's he hanging on about? Oh, he's all right.
There he goes again.
He's trying to get people to give Stu money this time. Amazing. But it did, and it worked, and we raised 22 grand for War Child, and obviously
that's
took
incredible.
out
well
a
done.
load of goodies. But anyway, this isn't about me. This is about you, Billy. And we always start the podcast by asking, I guess, if we say the words mental health, what's the first thing that comes to mind, Billy?
Stigma. That's the first word that kind of comes to mind for me, because that's an immediate barrier. And I think one of the things that I've really struggled with throughout my life with regard to my mental health is just acknowledging that I have a mental health issue and problem, and that there are means to, getting that seen to and to making myself, if not happier, at least more content, which, ripples on outwards into the other people in my life, because it's not just me that struggles, it's those who also have to cope and deal with me, and that's affected them to a large degree. But the stigma itself has, I think, for men, owing to the power of the patriarchy, this idea that we all have to present ourselves as hyper masculine, strong, silent types, that's an immediate inhibitor to us actually reaching out and seeking the help where it's needed. And I know, I went to a boys' school. I grew up in a household that was quite hyper masculine, and I was always considered a softie. And it's really just because, I wanted love and affection, and I wanted other people around me to be loved and to feel that they were receiving attentiveness and affection. And that was contrary to kind of the setup in my family home. And when I went to school, in a boys' school, that was always very hyper masculine, and I was struggling with depression. I had no idea I was bisexual. I had no idea. I was really badly bullied for apparently being gay, even though I knew internally that it was a little more complicated than that. So when I went out into the world, I went out with this immediate front, with this presentation of who I thought I should be to the world. And it wasn't until everything really, really started to fall apart that I realized that actually that was a massively unhealthy barrier that I was putting up by myself. And that was owing to the stigma that was attached to mental health, the way that people perceive mental health, the way people perceive masculinity, and the way that they perceive men who deal with their mental health struggles and are open about it, are seen to the world. So, still now, when I post online about my mental health issues, there is constantly this niggling thing in the back of my brain going, this isn't cool. This isn't manly. This isn't, the persona that I should be presenting myself to other people, especially as like the lead singer in a band who's, meant to be wearing sunglasses indoors and leather jackets in summer, and all these like synthesized notions of.
Well, we know you do that as well, Billy.
Yeah. I'm strictly no sunglasses indoors now. Don't you worry. Those days are long gone. But yeah, so, you know, the stigma is immediately, it's just like, it's this thing that I have to work through before I make a post, before I open up, or before I even talk to somebody about their mental health struggles. I need to sort of reinforce this idea that all that baggage that you carry with you when you try to talk about your mental health struggles, do your very best to shrug that off and to just be open and to just tell me how you feel. Or, you know, that's how I sort of talk to myself before I, you know, engage about discussions with regard to my mental health, is shrug that off, just be open. And that requires a lot of trust. You know, it requires a lot of trust for the person you're opening up to. It requires a lot of trust for the audience that are going to be seeing the post and engaging with it, because it's going to conflict with their ideas of who you should be. But, you know, that's all part and parcel of carving this new path for yourself and establishing a new paradigm, you know, because by contributing to this more open discussion about your mental health, you're changing the way that people are going to be thinking about their own mental health struggles. And that, you know, in itself ripples out into society. And even though it's very, very difficult to initiate that, the reward that you get for that in just being able to accept yourself by acknowledging your struggles, but also by hearing the stories of other people and realizing how you opening up allowed them to find the door to open themselves up too. It's incredibly rewarding. So yeah, stigma is just always there, and it's always something I'm having to combat.
So can I ask a bit more about that? So you've spoke about how you're kind of more mindful now, you know, when you go public around your mental health issues and some of the experiences that you've had. Can you remember when you first, I suppose, decided that you were going to start speaking publicly about it? Was it like a conscious decision, or was it more kind of reactive?
I felt almost, when I first decided to start speaking out about it, that it was a necessity, that if I didn't kind of like puncture this idea of what people thought I was, and I continued this fabricated stylized lifestyle, that I was going to crash and burn. It took a lot of courage, you know. It was really frightening. And there were some people around me who were going, this isn't a good idea, you know. And so you're not just like working against your own intuition, you're working against other people's suggestions that this isn't good for the brand, you know. But the brand itself was what was killing me. You know, I think that has something to do with the music that we make as well in the subways, is that it all seems very happy-go-lucky. But now that I've become more mindful about my own mental health struggles, I have looked back through our records and looked at the lyrics, and yeah, okay, we've framed a lot of our songs in these really happy-go-lucky style rock and roll pieces, but the lyrics themselves are like quite yearning. You know, there's a lot of pining there. There's a lot of reaching out for help, and there's a lot of sadness interwoven in a lot of the lyrics. So it was always there, and I think that to some extent is what people, you know, what resonated with people, is that there were these songs that you could dance to, you could mosh to, you could crowd surf to, but at the same time, there's kind of like there are points during the songs where there's like, I need help, help me, someone be there for me. It kind of felt like, you know, when I first opened up, this is maybe a natural part of the journey of truly finding myself and being who I truly am and connecting with that part of me in those lyrics. But at the same time, breaking this mythical idea that people had of me, which I think owes something to like the rock and roll industry as well, where, you know, the whole idea of mystery and the rock icon idolatry has been prevalent for like half a century now.
Mm.
Yeah, it was frightening. And when I made the post, I think it was something along the lines of, this is what it looks like to be suffering depression. And I was ragged, you know, I wasn't like positioning my phone, trying to get the best angles. I wasn't, you know, putting myself in front of a stage, or like in band rehearsals. It was me at home on the sofa under a blanket with my hoodie on, just going, I am torn to pieces. It must have been a shock for some people. It was definitely a shock for my grid, because you could see all the photos of me like crowd surfing, and then, you know, in an interview, or like over in New York at an award ceremony, and then there's me at home, like tears streaming down my face. But the responses were heartening, because you realize that actually, you know, people need to see this kind of stuff, because one of the real one of the great things about social networking is that it puts us in contact with people that otherwise we would never have been put in contact with. You know, you can kind of tacitly reach out to your heroes and get a response, though you're not like tactilely doing that. And I think one of the real horrid things of social networking sites is that it perpetuates this idea that everything's okay, because I think we're all kind of coerced to a certain extent to show everybody how great our lives are, because everyone else is doing it. Like, everyone else's life it's magical, it's glamorous, it's fantastic, it's all filtered, and it's all, you know, going out with drinks with your friends, and all, you know, really interesting settings and fantastic lighting, and, you know, don't we look fantastic? But it makes other people feel inadequate, you know? And when people see those that they, you know, witness on stage in front of 50,000 people, or you know, they see someone who, you know, who makes songs that they listen to every day, finally opening up and going, actually, this isn't the case, things are really difficult for me too. They're like, oh, okay, I'm not so isolated in my experience. I share something in common with that person, and maybe I can do that too. And then that's, you know, there's a domino effect. They start opening up, and then the people in their lives say, I never knew that. I never had any idea that you were this depressed, or that you experienced this, or that you're on SSRIs, or you know, that you're in therapy. I never would have thought of doing that, and maybe I'm going to think about doing it. So I think it was about 2015, 2016. It was a couple of years after I made the decision to go sober, because, you know, for years I was alcoholic, you know, into drugs. And I think that was part of the lifestyle of being in a rock and roll band. But that was also like the corollary of all these interior issues that I was dealing with, that I was refusing to confront, that everyone else was having to deal with, you know, in my life.
On that, Billy, that you know, that almost sort of self-medication of drink and drugs, you know, at that point. What, from your experiences in the music industry, was there, because the music industry is quick to glamorize and throw drink, drugs, you know, sex at people within that industry, and it's, you know, and you've had a long career, which is great, and you see lots of other artists that don't have such a long career and can get spat at the wrong end of it quite quickly. Did you ever feel that there was any infrastructure at that point, and I don't know if there, I hope there is now, within the music industry to protect people from these things?
There definitely wasn't. And I think it's because we came of age in the noughties, when, you know, hedonism was a big thing. It was like we were kind of reliving the 70s, 80s lifestyle that we idolized. You know, we were looking at our rock stars and going, wow, that was amazing. I want to, you know, I want to bring myself to the point of death like they did, because obviously that's the way to live. And there was just loads of it going on. But things are so much more different now. I know that there are trusts and organizations and institutions that have established themselves with the sole purpose of being there for people in the arts industry, because there is this idea that people in the arts are naturally inclined to do those kinds of things, to indulge in a hedonistic lifestyle, not least because it's like conducive to creativity, which is a complete myth, actually. But no, back in the day, I mean, you know, I remember going through the worst times of my life, especially, you know, the point at which I was drinking the most and doing drugs the most and sleeping around, and those around me were disinclined to intervene, because I was still going out and doing shows, and I was still making records, and I was still kind of making interesting music whilst living this lifestyle. And it's almost like, if we intercede here, are we going to disrupt the creative pattern? Because he's got a tour next year. We can't put him into a facility because, you know, we need that money as a float for next year's tour. And, you know, we can't spend that time that he would need rigorously self-assessing himself and going through this recovery process when we need him in the studio. So, yeah, there was this idea that actually it was probably more opportunistic for me to continue in that lifestyle because I was still creating, because I was still producing. And my ex-wife was the one who was facing the brunt of everything. She was begging everyone around me to do something about, you know, my behavior patterns. And eventually it took me risking our marriage for me to go, something's really wrong here. You know, I need to do something about this. It was New Year's Eve 2013, where I was sat in a bar. We were going for pre-drinks before going to a nightclub. The taxi pulled up outside and she said, I'm going in the taxi. Do you want to go? And I physically couldn't get myself off the bar. I couldn't bear the idea of spending 15 minutes in a taxi without booze in order to get to this nightclub, where I knew I could just keep sinking these drinks right here, right now. And she went on by herself. I went home. I woke up the next day, came downstairs and went, something has got to change. And it did. And unfortunately, because things were so bad, even after going sober, even after going through therapy, there were still really toxic behavior patterns that continued to the point where we ended up having to separate and go our own way. And we're still kind of dealing with the aftermath of that. And we both, I think, have got deep-rooted mental health conditions. I don't want to speak on behalf of her. She's a fantastic person. You know, her recovery is going quite well at the moment. But mine is ongoing. And I think that has something to do also with not just like the addictions that I faced during those years of being in the band, but also because of my early years trauma that I suffered in my childhood. So, things are definitely much better now in the music industry, because I think that this idea that you have to be a hedonist in order to make great works it has been completely punctured. And it's almost like it's really cool now to be straight edge. You know, it's it's really refreshing, because I remember when I first went sober and we were still going to festivals over in Europe, over in Australia, America, Japan, all these places, and people would be offering me their drinks and I'd be like, no, honestly, thank you so much, that's really kind of you, but no, I don't drink. And the responses were just of like,
why
incredulity.
not?
Yeah, what is going on? You're a rock star. And I'm like, I'm about to go on stage and do 90 minutes of rock, trust me. I'm rock, but I just don't engage in that sort of stuff anymore. But things have very much changed now. You know, if I were to do that now, they'd go, oh, cool, respect. You know, and that's a mere 10 years or so. And that change has happened in the last 10 years.
Can I ask, obviously without mentioning names or anything, when you, you know, started speaking about your mental health struggles, being somebody in the industry who could be perceived as, you know, having this idyllic lifestyle, you know, living your dream, doing what you love, and people, you know, having that attitude of, what have you got to be sad about? What have you got to be depressed about? And obviously that's something that a lot of people, you know, as you say, in the arts or any kind of creative industry, you know, would have to face.
Yeah.
Did you have many people from the industry kind of reaching out and thanking you for speaking out or sharing their stories or anything?
I did. And, you know, some of them were, you know, my heroes, and they'd sort of slide into the DMs and go, this is really amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. I've been sober however many years. I haven't spoken about it, but, you know, I might start thinking about speaking out about it. And that was heartening, but also really upsetting, because you think, wow, the imposition of this idea of what a rock and roll star should be is so powerful that these people of such stature still feel that they have to perpetuate it. Yeah, and we stay in contact now, and kind of help each other through. But you know, it's it's very tough. It's very, very tough, because I don't know. As far as we've come with regard to like changing the perception of how rock stars should be, and, you know, kind of veering away from that hedonistic lifestyle, there are people out there, and I don't want to name names, who kind of play on the idea of the addiction and incorporate it into their romantic notion of their persona. Whilst I think it's incredibly helpful for them to be discussing it, I also think that playing into this idea that it's as part of this glamorous lifestyle is kind of counterproductive. That
and
actually
quite damaging as well.
And quite damaging, to the point where I think it actually makes people think that engaging in the hedonistic lifestyle with a view to recovery is an interesting narrative to pursue, and it's not. It's incredibly damaging, and people's lives are in danger.
Mm. There's a responsibility there, isn't there?
Yeah, very much.
Can you, like, how old was you, Billy, when you realised that, you know, you mentioned the time when you were sitting on the bar stool, but was there a time before that when you realised? I'll tell you what, let's wind it back a little further. When did you first realise that, oh, hang on, I'm not quite sure my mental health's where it should be?
Well, it wasn't really a self-realization. It was an intervention, I suppose. I was in denial for so long, and that's just because of, like, you know, how I grew up and, you know, the industry that I was in. I was in denial. I was very much in a self-loathing place where people would say to me, there's a problem here, things aren't quite right, and I'd say, I'm just being a pussy. I just need to pull my socks up and get on with it. There's nothing wrong here apart from the fact that I'm a loser and I need to just, like, you know, get over myself. Other people have it much worse.
Because at that point, man up culture was a thing, wasn't it? You know,
huge. And whilst there's a kickback against that kind of man up culture now, though there are a few really toxic figures that perpetuate that idea that you just need to knuckle down and get on with it. And, you know, I was very much in that mindset. My ex was consistently saying, there is something wrong here. You are broken. This isn't the person that you're meant to be. There is a good person in there. We need to find him. And I can remember her saying, please go to the doctor. Please talk to the doctor. Please talk to them at the very least, if not about therapy, about medication. And reluctantly I went. And it took a professional saying, there's something wrong here. You know, this is not healthy. You should not be waking up at 3 p.m. eating a banana just so you can go straight down the pub and do it all over again. That is an addictive lifestyle, and you need to address it as soon as you possibly can. So I was still drinking when I decided to start taking antidepressants. And it wasn't until I realized that actually my addiction was part of my mental health condition that I decided to stop drinking and doing drugs. And that's when I actually went, therapy is integral here, because I can't just keep medicating myself. I have to actually consciously and cognitively delve into the reasons why I do what I do, why I feel the way that I feel on a day-to-day basis. I need to engage in a dialogue that's not making me dependent on the person I'm meant to be in an equal relationship with, because she's shouldering so much of this burden, and she shouldn't have to be doing it. She shouldn't be fixing me. She shouldn't be cleaning up after me. I need to be talking to a professional who can, you know, if not diagnose me, at least kind of go, maybe you should think about this. Maybe you should, you know, start your day like this. Maybe you should, you know, engage in a healthy lifestyle. Maybe this has nothing to do with that. Maybe this has something to do with this instead. You know, I think dialogue is an incredible part of opening up. And this is why, you know, being open about your mental health is so important, because there's only so much you can do internally about your behavior patterns, about the way that you feel. You really have to start verbalizing and challenging and interrogating these aspects of your personality, and being questioned and challenged. And that's, you know, one thing that I've realized about this life is that actually, like, it's really important to be challenged. It's really important to be interrogated. It's really important to acknowledge, because that's really one of the few ways we can fully consciously acknowledge who we are, is by seeing how someone else sees us. Seeing how someone else can judge our behaviors, our ways of thinking, our ways of feeling and seeing. So yeah, even if it's just a chat over coffee with a mate, those moments of dialogue are really important.
So did you say that there was a bit of reluctance or resistance to therapy? You were happy to take meds before you then went on to therapy?
Yeah. What I didn't want to do was sit in a room and discuss my problems. That to me,
why not?
It felt frightening, because, you know, I think unconsciously I knew there was like this plethora of issues, like these layers and layers and layers and layers of issues. And I was like, if I start peeling away at these problems, I'm just going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And I don't want to get that deep. I want to be fixed. I want to feel okay.
But I don't want to do the hard work.
Yeah, I don't want to do the work necessary for me to actually be healthy. And I was discussing this with somebody the other day. I'd got so used to being sad, right? So used to feeling not right within myself. So used to feeling anomalous and isolated that I was scared of not feeling that way anymore, because it was so comforting to me, because it was something that I was, you know, I was so used to. And it is a scary thing to go, wow, if I work to change myself through this really kind of rigorous self-assessment, this engaging process, I'm going to feel differently to how I feel now. But I know how I feel now. That's, you know, I'm acclimatized to that. But there's only so much you can do every single day feeling that way. You know, it will not last, because something horrible will happen to you. And, you know, 6 months ago, I attempted, you know, to take my own life. And I realized immediately then that, you know, I have to really work. I have to really do so much work. And I was so angry at myself and so ashamed that it took me getting to that point to finally realizing, oh, there is so much work to do. But, you know, the process started a while ago, and that, you know, signifies to me that it's not a linear process. And one of the things I think that puts people off going to therapy is that they don't see it working immediately, or that they don't see like a continuous, accumulative, accretive process where each therapy session sees them feeling happier. It's quite the opposite. It is a real challenge.
I've said to so many of my friends that are in therapy, if you come out of therapy, if you look forward to therapy and you don't come out of it feeling exhausted, completely, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. All you're doing is kind of like, and that's where you really need to look for a good therapist, because there have been some therapists I've found, and this was, you know, this is why a lot of my behavior patterns continued after I suffered a breakdown about 18 months ago, is that I went into therapy and I found a therapist who was very much a yes person, who kind of facilitated my behavior patterns and made excuses for them rather than challenging them. And it's important for us to feel like we are doing things wrong.
Yeah.
That, you know, that we've not necessarily made the right or correct decisions in the past. But it's equally important to realize that that's okay, because you realize that now. You know, that's a huge step forward. You know that that was wrong. Now you can move forwards in the knowledge that you're not going to do that again, because you know it's wrong. So it's a tough old fight to work against that idea that you don't want to go into therapy, because you know it's going to be a challenge, because you know that beneath those layers, those protective layers on the outside, that you've built up over the years, in order to protect yourself and from other people, they're going to be worked away at. And it leaves you vulnerable. It leaves you raw. I remember, 18 months ago when I suffered this tremendous breakdown, 3 days of wailing, crying, not eating, sipping at water. The only time I wasn't crying was when I was asleep, or, pulled myself together so I could go out and walk the dogs. I'd get straight through the door, take the harnesses off, and just fall to the floor again. It was because I was at a really raw place, because I'd been confronted properly through a really challenging process of who I'd been, how I'd really felt, the reasons why I was in that position, the hurt that I'd experienced. It all just came back as if it was present and happening to me at that very moment. The nerves were on the very tips of my skin, and I couldn't cope. And I knew then that things were never going to quite be the same. But at the same time, I kind of had this inkling that things were going to be way better than they ever were before because of that process. But it took time. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of guilt and shame, and apologies, and seeking apologies, and seeking explanations from others, seeking validation from myself, because at the same time, whilst we look back and lament those decisions and those experiences and the things that we put others through, we realize then that we're never going to do that again. And if we do it again, it's with a clearer head, and we have the tools to then apologize and make things right. So yeah, it's, I think we all want things to be so simple. We all want things to be so nice and so easy. And I think a large portion of Western society have convinced ourselves that that's how things are, and that's not how things are at all.
I don't think social media has helped with that.
No, definitely. And it's it's a real critical time, I think, social media, where there's a degree of challenge happening. There's a degree of resistance happening. And there's this kind of Hegelian process undergoing where, you know, this pendulum is swinging. It's like, you know, it's gone from this one side of everything's cool, everything's okay, to everything's the worst. Nothing is fixable. We are all going to hell, you know? And then it's kind of incrementally moving more towards the center where we're like, okay, things ain't great, but they ain't crap either. And we can do something about this. And I think that that's kind of like the way that therapy goes, is that you swing from these sides where you go into therapy, you're resistant, you are defensive, but that's chipped away at, and you feel horrible. And then you start to feel less horrible. And then you start to feel good. But then you feel horrible again, but it's not as bad as it was before. And then you start to feel not as good as you did before, but still kind of good. And then you reach this point of contentment where you're like, okay, this is doable, you know? And I think a part of life is realizing that enough is enough. You know, I got that for Rick and Morty. You know what you told me, Rick? You know what you told me? Enough is enough. And that's always stuck with me, is enough is enough. Just contentment in what we have.
Billy, you mentioned that you got to the point where you tried to take your own life a few months back.
Yeah.
For anybody that follows the podcast and reach out, that is experiencing any of the feelings or the things that you've spoken about today, or may even be at that point where they're considering this, what, if anything, would you say to them people?
I would like to say that the catastrophe that you're viewing and you believe is to be true in your mind, the catastrophe that you set up, that you believe that there's no way out from, that's not real. That tomorrow is another day to make things okay. I remember that in that moment, it's so odd. I think back to that day, and I remember waking up, and it was the happiest I'd felt in a long time, because I knew that it was the right decision for me to make. All day I knew that it was going to be my last day on earth, and you know, I planned it out. And my family told me, we had absolutely no idea. You looked so happy. And I was like, I was happy, because I thought I'd convinced myself that I'd found the solution to end all problems. And
no end.
Yeah, exactly. I would eradicate the pain I felt intrinsically within myself every single day, like viscerally running through my body, altering all perception of reality, that, you know, nothing was good, everything was dark, everything was going to hell. I was causing untold misery for everyone in my life, and I was going, this panacea was going to be the way out, that I would be gone and everyone could just move on and be happy with their lives without me. Yeah, it was not real. It was a fallacy I'd built up in my brain. This one true get out, and it's not. Every idea that I had about that decision was completely wrong. It was wrong that I did not have the power to change anything about myself, not least to feel happy again. You know, there are moments since that time where I've been so thankful that it didn't work, that my mum happened to not be able to sleep that night, and found me. So thankful that the paramedics arrived in time, that I was looked after so beautifully on that ward for the 6 days, thanks to the, you know, incredible work of the NHS. And I also am viscerally aware of the trauma, the lifetime's worth of hurt that I would have put on my family had I succeeded. Because I was absolutely convinced that they would all be so thankful that I did this. And it's not true at all. And even a couple of days ago, there was a point where I was catastrophizing, you know. I was walking along an A road and I just started crying, and I was walking for 45 minutes in the rain, weeping and wailing, holding my breath as people passed me by so that they didn't hear me. And then I'd just carry on when they were out of earshot, hoping that an oncoming lorry was coming fast enough in the opposite direction so that I could leap in front of it and just end it all. And I just remembered what my sisters told me, what my mum and dad told me, what my brother told me, what my friends told me, what my bandmates told me, that they would never get over it. But I also remembered those points, those moments in the day when I thought, existence is so brief and so beautiful, and I just want to soak up every second. Every breath is so gorgeous, and I get to spend it with these incredible people that I would have hurt so badly. So yeah, I'm so sorry that that's so long-winded, but I'll try and reduce it again. The catastrophe you set up in your mind, it's not real. Just think of tomorrow.
And to sort of bring it up to speed, Billy, week to week, what's your sort of routine and sort of techniques for managing your mental health?
So I have borderline personality disorder, and what that means is that I'm impulsive, I'm compulsive, I suffer extreme and fluctuating mood swings, and that partially explains my addictive personality. I suffer auditory hallucinations and a variety of things. So for me, it is a dedicated and constant routine. So the first thing I do in the morning is I take my pills and I have breakfast. Because if I miss those, everything else is a struggle. You start to feel hungry, you feel weak, you feel like, you've got a lack of concentration. And that's when you start kicking yourself. Oh, things are terrible. Oh, I'm not looking after myself. And then it builds and builds and builds. And I've done a lot of work as well. I mean, through the crisis centre in the NHS, I underwent 12 weeks of intensive dialectical behavioural therapy, and I learned so much in just being able to deal with the invariable fluctuating emotions that I experience on a day-to-day basis. So it's really just about realising I'm ever attentive to swings in mood change. And, it's not entirely a success. The other day I posted a story on my Instagram that was kind of lamenting the situation I was going through without taking into consideration all the extraneous issues that were going on in the people's lives around me that were having to deal with me. So I became very selfish. But not long after I posted that story, I went, this is solipsistic. This is selfish. This is you catastrophizing again and, making yourself out to be the victim. So I immediately deleted it and I set about apologizing and, reaching out and doing those kind of things. So on a daily basis, it is a constant game of self-reflection, of acknowledgement of my attitude and my behaviors and my feelings, and following the steps that were taught me during those dialectical behavioral therapy sessions. So if I feel a particular way, I have a logbook, flip to it. This is what you need to do in order to combat this. And I do it.
And I do it a book that you created, or that you created alongside professionals?
It's a book that so there were like these, it was so great, the therapy. They would have these, oh, what are they called? I've got the app here somewhere.
TV? Is it like film? What are we doing?
I know, a PowerPoint. It was a PowerPoint. So they'd do these slides and that kind of thing, and I would take notes. So I kind of like, I looked at how there are so many different ways and manifestations of borderline personality disorder. Every person who suffers from it has their own kind of behavior patterns that they fall into, which is kind of arbitrary according to, you know, their own experiences throughout their life. And I kind of know my triggers, I know my stresses. So it was kind of written in tandem with going through the slides of dialectical behavioral therapy. So I know, because I have a certain pattern, that if I'm feeling or a certain way or doing a certain thing, that I need to go to that certain page. So the other day I was feeling paranoid, and what I wanted to do was I wanted to lock myself away in my room, climb under the covers, and just moan about it online and do nothing about it, when actually I did the exact opposite. I put my coat on, put my shoes on, and I got on the train and I went sightseeing in Cambridge. And it was the last thing I wanted to do, you know, because I just wanted to, I wanted to feed this paranoia that I was feeling. I wanted to validate it. And I know that that's the way towards toxicity for me. So I went, no, stop right there. Put everything down, phone, wallet, ciggies, off you go. So, after a couple of hours, I felt leveled out again, you know.
Was it hard though, those first kind of 20 minutes, half an hour, getting on the train, making that journey?
Yeah, it felt like stepping into the abyss. There were points when you're like, am I putting myself in danger here? You know, because I know that the places my brain goes to, especially when I'm like getting the train. But I knew that I had to do it, and this is the way for me to get healthier in that moment. But yeah, I know that I benefit from routine. Some people, I don't, feel like it constrains them too much, but I know that routine really helps me. So I know that if I take my pills, I have my breakfast, I go for my first coffee of the day, after that, everything's usually okay. But if I break that routine, things start to destabilize. Stability, I think it probably has its origins in moving around a lot when I was a kid, and that wasn't helped by being in a touring rock band,
Yeah.
Months away on tour, not really feeling like that there was a homestead, a place for solitude and comfort. So now I yearn for routine and stability, and I'm like, if I make that for myself, then everything is usually okay after that. Not just for me, but for everyone else around me as well.
Billy, I knew when I reached out to you to come on here, you'd be so open and honest. And thank you for being comfortable to be so vulnerable and talk so openly, Billy. It's so kind of you.
Well, just thank you so much, Stu and Kirsty, for having me on. It's I feel honoured to just be thought of. So thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And before we wrap things up, what's happening after Christmas? What's happening in 2023? Are we going to see what's happening with Subways?
Right. So we've got, this is why I need to get in the gym. We're shooting a new video soon for the single, which is coming just before the album release in January. It's the best song. I think it's the best song we've ever made. So I'm really looking forward to people hearing it. But yeah, we've got a new album out in January 2023, off on tour around the UK, January, February. And we've just started booking some festivals in the UK and Europe over the summer next year. So it's looking good. It's looking good. It's something I have to keep reminding myself, this next year's going to be good. So keep going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If people want to keep up to speed with everything you're up to, where's the best place, Billy?
Best place is probably at the Subways on Twitter, at the Subways on Instagram, and I'm personally at Billy Lunn on Instagram.
Lovely. Billy, thank you so much. I'm going to press stop. Don't go anywhere.